Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm your host, Hilmarie. In the high-velocity worlds of tech and venture capital, most people are running on default programs. The standard path of school, a steady job, and linear growth. But what happens when the matrix rejects you? My guest today experienced a glitch early on. He was fired from nearly every job he held before graduating college. Today, he has rewritten that code entirely. David Awad is a software engineer, venture capitalist, and attorney. He operates at the high stakes intersection of tech, investing, and legal diligence. From a musical theater hopeful to a sophisticated investor living abroad in Thailand, David is proof that you can absolutely change your circumstances through the power of compounded decisions. David, did I get all that right?
Wow, we should stop the podcast right there. Great work. Well done. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show, and I'm sure there's a lot more to unpack. David, before we dive into global markets and your journey through the law, I'd like to begin with our signature green pill question. You've said that you can absolutely change your circumstances through compounded decisions. If you took the green pill to go back in time and change one thing about your journey, what would it be?
I think the better answer, maybe the first lesson I might have said to myself, two or three things perhaps. The most important first thing, and a really easy thing, and I think a lot of this advice turns out to be really easy when you sit down and really dig into it, is just to start saying yes to everything, right? Just go back, a bunch of opportunities come by your desk. You don't always realize what is and isn't an opportunity, but you certainly do know how to say yes to lots and lots of things, especially when I was younger. Not that I didn't say yes to lots of things, but if I had been more deliberate about saying yes to more things sooner, that would have made a big difference. And even things where you don't have any way to know what the opportunities will be. There's a really great Steve Jobs quote where he says that lots of people have these big disjoint moves in their lives where they go from one place to the next and it looks like a jump. And the thing is, you can't connect the dots in reverse. These jumps will happen, but you have no way to know when or how. And so the best you can do is simply try to make sure that the circumstances arise for those jumps to occur. And the easiest way to do that is to put yourself into the right places or circumstances. And that is very much a form of luck, right? One is doing things actively yourself, being in an industry where lots of things are happening, and then living in a place where lots of things are happening. You know, a place like Dubai or like Austin, these places where lots of people are doing stuff, building new things, et cetera. And as long as all three of those different forms of entropy are pretty high, lots of opportunities will arise. You won't always know where they arise from. And you just have to say yes to everything and go after it. And if you do, if you're deliberate and careful about that, then you'll find all kinds of doors open when you do. And so lean in, don't doubt yourself. Just lean into being yourself as soon as you can. Focus on learning as much as you can and bettering yourself based on what you really enjoy. And your mind and your curiosity and your heart will guide you towards things that will end up with success in various forms. I think that's probably the best advice I could give anyone, and what I would tell myself.
I think that's absolutely brilliant advice. Say yes to everything and then also live and work in a place where lots of things are happening. And I think this is very good advice, of course, for somebody who's young. There's a lot of opportunity to still compound the impact of those decisions, but I don't think it matters at what age you start doing this. At any age, you can start having this mindset of saying yes to opportunities rather than being afraid to take a leap.
Right. So I'll give one more given just the work I do. And that's just learn how the world works. And that sounds like a lazy answer. So I'll be more precise. I found that I was able to make much more sophisticated decisions about what opportunities were better than others when I understood a couple of basic things about how the world worked. For example, when I first graduated college, I was like, okay, like as silly as it sounds, like zoom all the way out and define what it is that we're all trying to actually achieve. When I was in college, I thought that the most important benchmark was just going to be how much I was paid. So I'm working a job. But then you must ask the question, what am I working the job for? If the job is for the money, well, what is that? What is the money? And literally, physically, where is it? I can't go and rob a bank today. Most of the money is not physically inside a bank. So, literally, where is it? Like, understand how your currency works. Where are the central banks? What are their policies? Where do they keep the money? There are things like gold reserves, right? Just literally where and how does the money work? You're working for the money, which is presumably to enable you then to do a bunch of other things that you want to do. So if you understand how the world works, then you can kind of figure out the mechanics of that. And ultimately, what will follow is you can sit down and say, well, I want this money in order to be able to do A, B, and C. And then if you really sat down and thought about it, oh, like what I really want is A, B, and C. It's not the money. The money's just a proxy, right? So if you sit down and deconstruct that, let's say you said, for example, I want to, I don't know, travel the world. That's very, very common, right? There are jobs you can pick that would allow you to travel the world now. So if what you want is to travel the world, you can go walk over to Emirates, right? And just get a job as an airline stewardess or steward, and you can do that. You can do that traveling. You can have those experiences. You didn't need to suddenly work for 40 years, get a retirement, become a multimillionaire, and then travel. In fact, if what you want is the traveling, that experience is available to you by other means. So figure out A, B, and C, what the things you actually want are, and how many of those things can you have today that don't actually require some massive amounts of wealth and riches. And you can do that and deconstruct that if you understand what you want and how the world works. That's my last thing. My important lesson, I think, to take away that's more financially minded, perhaps, which is that the art of investing is understanding what has value. And that is a very, very careful and nuanced art. And if you can practice that art well, the decisions that you make about your own future very much are investments and require an understanding of how the world works. That is my last soapbox to give you for this question, anyway.
Fantastic. Well, I hope there's going to be some more soapboxes along the way, but I absolutely love that. I've never heard anyone explain it in those terms. And it makes absolute sense that if you can actually drill down and understand what it is you want to achieve, you can bypass certain steps. You don't have to make $1 million or whatever that figure is to go traveling. You can find a job that fills that need. Go work on a cruise ship, work for Emirates. You're right. I love it. I think that is excellent insight. And I do hope a lot of young people will hear that message from you because it is so important. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. You've openly shared that you were fired from nearly every job before college graduation. In those moments of failure, what was the internal default program you had to delete to stop the cycle of setbacks? You might not call them setbacks.
No, they were setbacks. And it wasn't exactly every job per se, but I had a lot of early jobs when I was in high school and things like this where probably the biggest problem it was watching a little bit too much TV. So you get an unrealistic sense of what the world is really like, which is why you have to work the jobs in the first place. You just get a better sense of perspective, right? So in order to gain perspective, you have to work a job. That experience with reality is very useful. Getting the kind of objective feedback from other people and putting yourself through challenges. This is a good thing, right? Like if you walk through these experiences with the sense that a job is simply something you have to do, and that's it, your operative framework of what it is you think you are doing when you are working a job. What is literally happening is you are exchanging your labor for money. That is it. There are many different kinds of labor, and and then they all have very different cost benefit profiles. Some work has multiple benefits. You can sort of orchestrate those things, right? But I never came to appreciate any of that, right? I just kind of assumed that a job is something that it's almost like a job happens to you. You are a person who has to work a job. And so that is an external world operating upon me as opposed to the opposite, which is you having agency to pick and choose what labor you will perform and for what rate you perform it. And in fact, you can always constantly be involved in the labor marketplace. You can always apply for more jobs. You can always be, like we said earlier, seeking more opportunities. So that notion of undoing this framework of, oh, I am a cog or I am a stone or a fish. I'm mixing my metaphors probably because I haven't slept too much in going into today. But the idea that you are being operated on by the waters and waves pushing you around, as opposed to a bit of the opposite. You are free to swim in any direction. And it is true that macroeconomics will produce large tides and waves in different directions, but you are able to swim and you can choose and make lots of different decisions about what the future would be like. And if you believe that you can't, well, then you'll have to work anyway. So you might as well try to make different changes about the future, which I can tell you reliably has always produced better outcomes for the people who believe that they can make the changes versus not believing so. Even if it wasn't true, it would at least empirically appear that believing that it was the case that you could change your outcomes does produce vastly more positive outcomes.
Yes. So even though you had those experiences, you had to actually go through them to learn what the next steps were going to be.
Yeah, you just have to fail and become okay with that. The number of failures in my time is great. Hopefully not increasing too fast, but the number of failures is actually completely irrelevant to, how successful you're going to be. If you defined, let's suppose you did define success purely in terms of money. Well, you only ever have to get rich once, right? If that was the goal, you don't have to do it more than once. It doesn't really matter. You can fail all the time. You just have to make sure that you set yourself up such that when you fail, it is not asymmetrically bad for you. If we all sit down and pick up a probability textbook, just make sure that the expected value of each of the things that you do is positive. If it is, then over time, one way or another, with enough repetitions, you will start to compound because you are gradually, consistently doing asymmetric EV positive things, which is really all that there is to it.
I love your honesty and that I don't think I've started many podcasts talking about the failures. I absolutely love that you're willing to talk about it because there's such great learning for us from your experience.
So when my very first job I ever had, I was at, I'm trying to think of how much of the story I can curate, but it went something like this. My first job, I was working at a catering hall, and the maitre d there, they had a lot of events at this place. And something that happened because I watched too much TV and I was a pretty silly kid was I had messed something up for one of the tables I just brought. I think I like brought the wrong plates or something to a particular table. It wasn't a big deal. The maitre d was stressed, so he yelled at me and told me to quote get out of here. Right now, he was referring to get out of this dining room and just go and work on the other dining rooms for other events with the other maitre d. But I thought because I watched too much TV. When he said get out of here, I thought that I was just fired. And so I just left. Like I never returned to the place. And it turned out that he did mean go to the other rooms, work with the other maitre d's because he was sick of working with me, but that I was not fired. And I found out only like months later that he was like, yeah, what happened to you? You totally disappeared. And I was like, I thought I was fired. Like it was nonsense, right? Like one of those classic misunderstandings. If you just accept the failures, don't take things too personally. It probably would have been very obvious that I had, in fact, not been fired had I just like come back the next day or just had a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not even belief in myself per se. Maybe there's a little bit of that, but just a little bit more perspective. I probably would have I probably would have kept that gig a little bit longer than I did. So there's silly things like that.
That's a great story. I love it. Very good. I mean, you could just have walked across the room to the other guy and said, hey, he's just told me to get out of here. What do I do now? Then things might have turned out differently, right? But again, you learn from these.
Just asking the question.
Yeah, exactly. You originally wanted to do musical theater in college.
Yes.
How does the mind of a performer still influence what you do today?
I don't know that there's certainly not an investing. While I'd love to shoehorn some sort of investing lesson like all of the other venture capitalists like to do, I don't know that there's an investing lesson here. But I will say, I think the most important thing that you learn by being an actor, actors are people who have a lot of desires. Those desires can be very all consuming. And I think the most important thing that I learned from that is when you're an actor or someone who wants to do these kinds of performances, if what you want is to be a great actor, that is very different than wanting to be famous or wanting to be on Broadway. They have in comedy, they have this saying of people who are killing in obscurity. And what they're referring to is comedians who are really good, but they only ever perform at local and small comedy clubs. They're not trying to become big and famous or whatever. They just love the game. They love the art. That was how I felt, at least about improv comedy and comedic acting, that kind of stuff. I did that for years in high school and college. But the other people that I was meeting were not people who were in it for the love of the game. They were in it because they wanted something else out of it. And what I've learned as a desire is sort of just an agreement with yourself to not be happy until you have something, whatever that thing is. In my experience, not wanting something is better than having it. While I did enjoy like the experiences of learning musical theater, like musical theater, comedy, improv, stand up, all wonderful, wonderful pursuits. I think unless you're ready to make that 100% your life, you can't be a tourist in that world. Or at least if you're going to be a tourist in that world, you got to accept that you're only ever going to be a tourist in that world. You'll never be able to go anywhere with it. You certainly you can't jump in there part time. That's for sure. Separately from that, I loved learning the art of communicating, if you will, that these guys had. So many of them were so good at it, like fantastic communicators, all of them. And that also, fortunately, did transfer to me with all of the different experiences that came through. I got way better at communicating. I'm certainly the funniest venture capitalist that I've come into contact with, far funnier than most of the people I've worked with on the different investments and what have you. And it didn't take a lot, right? I'm not even that funny, but it was just the bar was that low because not many people are sitting down and studying a bit of comedy. So things like that make a big difference. I think that mind of a performer might be a fun way to put it. I think in reality, like those skills will be so useful. That sense of timing and the sense of how to package something so that it has a punch when you're working together with people in the right moments, that comedy is incredibly valuable and just more fun, right? Like you'll carry those kinds of skills with you. That's the short answer to your question. Like, at least for me, my favorite art is comedy. So that's the thing I would say as far as the mind of a performer. Depending on what kind of work you do. If you're in consulting, for example, you're always performing in a sense. But so carry that whimsy with you. It's incredibly valuable and it'll make the days short, to be sure. Even though the days feel long, they'll feel a lot shorter if you're able to create joy out of nothing, right? Like it's not much is required to create really fun experiences for people out of what would otherwise be ordinary and mundane interactions.
Yes, I love that. Also, like your perspective, again, it comes back to understanding what it is that you're looking for. You spoke about the all consuming desire, and it could be either for the love of the art, or is it because you're wanting to become rich or famous or whatever? So, understanding what it is that you're wanting out of it actually impacts a lot of how you carry that forward. And I think everyone can do with some comedy and some laughter in their day. Also loved what you said about not wanting something is better than having it. Do you want to unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, like I said, a desire is an agreement with yourself to not be happy until you have something. And so, what do you know? Lots of people who have things they really, really want that they can't get because the universe, like, not all things can be purchased, right? The universe just may not be set up in such a way that you will be able to have that thing. And if you don't get it, well, you won't be happy. But if what most people want, I think this is true, it appears most people would prefer to be happy than not. So you're better off not desiring whatever thing that is producing the subsequent unhappiness as a result. And in reality, I've found the less that you want, the happier you'll be. Because if you don't want that object, then owning it makes no difference. You should be, you as an individual, proverbially speaking, should be the center of gravity of your own lived experience. And if that's not the case, meaning if you would be upset by not having either this car or this amount of money or this set of experiences that you think you are supposed to have, well, if you didn't want those things, it would make no difference. So those things now have no pull on you, right? Your center of gravity, wherever that is, should be within you, right? It presumably should be your choice whether or not you do and don't want something and are not happy about any given situation or circumstance.
That's excellent. Fantastic. I've always believed happiness comes from inside. And people sometimes look at me, yeah, but nice things are, having a nice car, having fancy clothes, having watches, bags, whatever. That I've always said, they don't impress me. Doesn't make me happy. Honestly believe happiness comes from inside. And what you've just said, you've articulated it a lot better than I do by saying you need to be your center of gravity in your world. And I think that just is excellent way to look at it.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, and this one comes from Naval Ravikant, if you are familiar. He basically says the following three things cannot be bought and must be earned. And that is a calm mind, a fit body, and a house full of love. And those three things require effort. Nothing else will produce them. And finally, parenthetically, the respect of your peers, which must be earned as well. I think we all have workplaces where we know who really, quote unquote, deserves either this, that, or the other promotion. And it's certainly not always the case that the person who deserves it the most receives it, because the real world is a series of complicated trade-offs that managers and leaders have to make based on what their current short-term and long-term needs and circumstances are. So that is one last thing I'll just add there in terms of what is kind of in the back of your mind. It's presumably those three things, right? Calm mind, fit body, house full of love. Those things are not easy, and they're very, very important.
Yes. And as you say, you can only work for those things. You can't buy those things. You earn those things or through time or by putting in the effort.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit. You have said that you believe success is the result of good decisions compounded over years. For someone currently in a difficult situation with very little, what is the very first good decision they should make today?
The first thing you should do, like we said earlier, is write out the goals in a spreadsheet. What are the things you actually want? That would be presumably step number one. If you don't know what you want, then I don't know what criteria you're using to decide. If you know what you want, decisions are easy. Great. So let's start with that. Write them out in a spreadsheet. Then figure out what is the actual utility, let's call it. We can define this as a number. What you now want is a measurable number so that you can look at certain kinds of big choices and decisions to figure out what is the expected utility relative to the cost of this, that, or the other decision. We can define this. This is a formula, and these are numbers that we can work with. So if you define the goals, you know what they are, then utility is simply a measure of the increase in aggregate across those 3 or 4 goals. So every time you make a decision now, you can ask a question like, what is the expected utility? Meaning I'll now take a probability and multiply the probability of success by the utility that I would receive as a function of all of the goals that I have. So I can make some Excel functions in a spreadsheet right now, define all that and say, okay, if I have this goal I have, maybe I want to have $100,000 in annual income, right? Or something like that. So maybe the most tried and true way to do that for your particular industry is going to be to get some certification. And if you get that certification, then there's like a 75% chance you'll get a job by the end of the year that has that. Great. So then that's a 75% chance times the 1 in this case, a one value towards that particular goal, that bucket. So that has a clear expected utility that you can derive. And now you can compare how, when you look at how you spend your time, one decision will have one expected utility, other decisions will have other expected utilities. At which point you compare the expected utilities of all of the different things you could be doing and pick and start working on whichever thing has the highest expected utility. Boom, done. Then rinse and repeat that forever. Problem solved. That's the first thing you can do. You make the spreadsheet, define the goals, look at the utility function that works for between the goals you have and how you will measure that utility. And then you will be able to run with that for a good long while. I wrote a blog post on this specifically because it just seemed so obvious to me. Maybe we learn these lessons over from public markets where it's very similar to what you might do if you're making an investment, right? You sit down and you say, I have this, that, or the other goal. In the public markets, the answer is just what's my dollar amount? And then with every single speculative investment I might make, I look at the expected value of the investment and how long it'll take to achieve X, Y, or Z ROI. And then the hedge funds are very good at running all of these different Monte Carlo simulations. They'll try this 5,000 times and say, okay, we ran this thing 5,000 times. It's 4,500 of the times it works well. When it works really well, it's this good. When it works okay, it's this good. So here's our expected range of possible outcomes when we cut this check, all of that stuff. And that produces such sophistication in the choices that you can make. But the very same philosophy can apply to you, a regular person deciding which certification you're going to get in your particular industry or something like that. So that's the first thing, right? Start defining the expected utility amongst of the different decisions that could put you to the directions of each of the different goals you might have. You can only pick a few goals, by the way.
That makes absolute sense. You can't have too many goals. But as you said, if you don't have a goal, if you can't even start with knowing what you want, well, you cannot take the next step. You need to understand what it is that you want to achieve.
Yep. And the only other thing that's helpful on top of that is just read a lot of excellent books. There is so much value in just sitting down and reading, not random books. I think my lazy answer in terms of a recommendation is just go look up what are the top 100 books, just in general. 48 Laws of Power, maybe that is Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. Maybe that is like for your particular field. Just go look up the top 100 books and read those. Reading the top 100 books multiple times would be more valuable than reading random books or seeing other books once. You're almost better off reading the best books multiple times. I think that's a very important thing that lots of people should do. Just read a lot of excellent books. It's very important.
And I think that's becoming a skill many people are not doing. People are not making time to read anymore.
And the statistics would suggest so. Fortunately, though, there's a lot of books where there are some weird publisher incentives out there where like publishers will say, in order for this book to look good on the shelf so that I can get it to clear, 200,000 copies or whatever, I need it to look this way, or it has to have 200 pages, or I need this font size, these margins. So usually in my experience, there's not a lot of books where it's just constant new ideas that are incredibly valuable. Sometimes you'll come back to a book and you'll get a new thing out of it when you read it again for some of the classics. But there are other books where there's really 2 or 3 famous pieces of it that are really great. And those are the most valuable ones for you to spend your time on. So it depends very much on which book you're looking at. But you definitely don't have to read an entire book cover to cover to get a majority of the value out of it. For example, at least for me, Connect by David Bradford, this book is about relationships. This entire book, for me, the most valuable part of it was on page like 10. Where they define the 6 criteria of an exceptional relationship. It was just one of the most useful things I had ever read. And I didn't even need the rest of the book. I still have it, obviously, but I didn't need to read the rest of it to understand their whole point in that book was in chapter 1. It says, look, we've done all this research. Me and the 2 authors, we've done all this research. We know exceptional relationships can be developed. They have these hallmarks. Here's all 6 of them. That's it. And then we're going to dive into each one for the rest of the book. And I didn't need the rest of the book. I was convinced. I didn't doubt them, right? And that's all that's required. And now, like You'll find that in different books. You take different pieces, stories, history, you'll just get exposed to so many different valuable lessons from all over the place. And it's just tremendously helpful to do that.
I love that, and something I should consider because I'm so OCD. I cannot stop, even if it's awful, to finish what I started. So that's my problem. I cannot stop till I've got to the end. So maybe something I can learn to apply. Get the nuggets out, and then you don't actually have to finish every single book that you start. You are currently living in Thailand while working in Dubai and holding a US law degree. So a lot of mix in there. How has living by design changed your perspective on what it means to make it?
Oh man, to have said I had made it is a tough one. That's a very, very high bar, at least, or that's a very interesting phrase. I used to tell my then fiance and girlfriend, now wife, we're going to make it. That was a common phrase for us, specifically because the idea at the time was one, I don't know that I had made it. There are many different small things that start to come together over time where you really do feel like you've made it. And man, like it is a special feeling. So the most useful thing about success is that you get to decide what it is. You get to decide when you're successful at the end of the day. Like you set the mark for yourself, you aim for it. And if you hit it, that's all that's required. So if what you want, for example, is to be free and to own your own home, you can totally do that. You just have to go find a cheap home and then find a way to work remotely, for example. And that was my lazy answer, which was, okay, am I going to sit and grind it out until like 55 and then go travel after? Or can I kind of do this in reverse or some combination of that? It's been an interesting road. There's partially, it really depends on what kind of work you do and how much work you're willing to put in, right? Like this, I almost don't like the phrase living by design because you don't get to really 100% pick the circumstances that happen to you, but you do get to gradually influence what work you're doing just based on what skills and how much work you're willing to do up front, right? Like not a lot of people are willing to do a master's in computer science and law school and hash that out while also working the whole time, right? Like it sounds very cool now, but it was a grind for 10 years. I mean, I'm thinking back, yeah, like just the law school was 4 years and then 2 years on top of that for the master's in CS. Just the amount of work that was required that would eventually get me to this point where we could even have a conversation about something like that. That is what is not obviously visible, right? And you don't always know ahead of time that you'll be able to produce that. So the most exciting thing that I came away from all these experiences with as far as how to be successful is the most important thing is to decide how success will be defined and keep that in mind so that you know what exactly it looks like, kind of like I said at the beginning. If you define what it is specifically that you want, whatever those things are, maybe it is to travel, then you can reverse engineer the circumstances that would produce as many of those goals as possible. And this is just kind of one example of that. There wasn't anything specifically about any of these particular countries or cities that changed my opinion. I think it was just a lot of gratitude and appreciation over a long run. If you asked me at any random time during the last 10 years if I thought I was successful, I would have said no. And I would have had an ever raising bar for what I wanted to achieve relative to what I had. And after a certain point, certainly when someone else is in the picture and when you get married, you'll start to realize that if you are never content, well, certainly that one, it gets old. But also, after you get married, you're responsible for someone else's happiness too. And that's an extremely important responsibility that you are given by your spouse's parents, right? They are trusting you with the happiness of their son or daughter as well. You can't just sit there and be frustrated about not being as successful as you want to be. You have to be deliberate and let's say just deliberate about making sure that you are content with whatever your circumstances are, whatever they are. And also, if you desire less things, you'll probably find yourself feeling more successful than not. And so over my time in these different areas, I think that experience has become more and more accurate. That I've learned simply to desire less things, to focus more on just making sure that more options are available than anything else. Not having handcuffs is a very wonderful thing. And lots of people should be able to experience that. And more people could experience that than you would think. but there are polite illusions, let's say, that trick you into thinking you can.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that drive people, unfortunately, is comparison. So instead of defining for themselves what is success or when is it enough, when will I be content, they look at others and say, well, I have to have that kind of car, I have to have that size house. So it's the comparison that starts setting what the goals are. What is the definition of success? Whereas if you just flip that around and say, what is it that I am looking for? What is my success? And I love the word that you kept using was contentment. And that things don't bring you happiness. You set that bar of when is it enough for me? Because even very wealthy people, you can ask them, have you got enough? And it's usually the answer is no. They always want more. And so they stay in that glitch, I don't know what you want to call it, of trying to get more and more and more without ever getting to that contentment.
Yeah, even with sometimes, so I'm a mentor in a couple of different programs. I'll mentor some founders and I'll mentor some other in some other groups, the Kentucky Colonels and some other nonprofit areas. And sometimes I'll talk to someone who's younger or just someone who is like kind of thinking through a similar issue. So I'll just say, like, okay, how much money would be required before you just stopped? Like, what's your number? And a lot of people don't have one. And then it'll be like, well, certainly there is a number. I can tell you I have one, right? And there is some number for which you will think, I do not need to work anymore, right? It's fine if you think, in this case, this was someone I was talking to who was thinking about a career choice, like looking at, a recent sort of college admission situation. So thinking about a career choice. And I was like, okay, well, what is the actual number? Right? Is that like they came back and they were like, okay, $13 million. I'm like, great. Well, at least you know now, because now you can figure out what are the series of decisions that you might have to make and what will you have to likely sacrifice if you want a reasonable probability of actually getting that. That's not an easy path, but that's a path you can at least understand because you sat down and you wrote the number. So you can try to come up with what the highest probability way to get to that is. But if you never write it, you literally don't know, which is to suggest that you will never know whether you have done enough because you never sat down with yourself and said, here's how much I think I need as a function of what I want. So very, very important. You should actually define it. Very dangerous otherwise.
Yeah, because you don't have that goal, then yeah, what are you working towards? It's just a bottomless pit of not knowing where you're going. And it all comes back to what you said in the beginning. Have to define the goal, have to define what is success for you. And is it internal things or external things that you're looking for?
Yes.
David, now I would like to look at your personal operating system. In venture capital and law, success is often hidden in the execution of the smallest details. We call this the Monday move. What did you do this past Monday at 9 a.m. that moved the needle on a deal, a legal case, or a personal goal? We don't want the 30,000-foot view. Give us the specific protocol or the line of code that you ran to set your week in motion.
So this may not be a very useful one, but I've been, or maybe not the most relevant, perhaps. I've been playing around with a lot of algo trading for public stocks, public markets. That's been a lot of fun. I think learning to write strategies just as a hobby, just been a lot of fun to try it. Learning to write strategies and algorithms for trading public markets teaches you a lot about like market structure and what have you. That didn't make a big difference necessarily in a micro way, the way you're talking about. But the thing that did change was I built some automated tooling around pulling articles and kind of churning those articles into a personal knowledge base. So that has been the very tactical thing. There is an emerging trend with people using AI tools, especially personal AI tools. I think this is very clearly the future. This used to be called a digital garden a couple of years ago, and I really leaned into this concept at that time. And the idea with the digital garden is this: you curate all of the files and memories that you have and notes. You curate that together into a bundle that you are constantly like reviewing and editing. Maybe you have different jobs or what have you, and you track notes for your tasks and things. And now you turn that, if you have tended well to your digital garden, you have produced fertile soil upon which an AI may bear fruit for you, because the AI now has a rich bevy of context from which to produce valuable work on your behalf. And that has been the thing tending to that, either in an automated or semi automated way through scripting, has been a pretty tactical and very life changing kind of experience. For example, if I say, I want to go and pull all of these articles from this Substack or that Substack, or maybe these tweets, you can pull those things automatically, store them as text in a format that an LLM can read. And then you can download and run your own LLMs on your own consumer hardware, maybe the Google Gemma models that are pretty new, things like that. If you're tending well to your digital garden and making tactical tools to automatically populate that digital garden with new and useful materials, those materials will gradually aggregate and become more valuable with time, because it is a garden tended by you, curated to who you wish to be and what knowledge you wish to have. Even if I, with my ordinary meat brain, can't recollect all of it, I can craft workflows and tooling that will enable me to recollect everything that I could have ever wished that I could. And seeing the fruit of that in tending to that digital garden, populating those articles and knowledge base and information over time has been an incredibly valuable thing. So that's my answer.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, and that you've been working at this for some time. I love how you say learning to write strategies is fun. Now we would like to look at your decision inventory. You transitioned from a desire to do musical theater to the rigorous worlds of software engineering and law. Can you tell us about a decision you made to pivot that felt like a complete sacrifice of your identity at the time, but proved to be the essential move for your long term sovereignty? What did that cost you in the short term, and what did it gain you in the long run?
If you have a master's in computer science in 2020, if you're looking forward in 2020, the idea of going to law school seems literally insane. Like, there is zero reason to do that. It just seems completely ridiculous. At the time, I thought of this as I was going to learn a lot in a completely orthogonal area to where I had been thus far. So I figured it was going to be useful for multiple reasons. And I think I was right. But at that time, the idea of doing law school was really ridiculous. So that was a big kind of pivot. I mean, nobody thinks you're throwing your life away if you're going to law school. But a lot of people I knew were like, why are you even bothering with this? It doesn't make any sense. Just go work at a big tech company. The number of people who said that to me was just massive, especially because I went to an online only, non ABA law school. And what that means is essentially the law school is accredited, but in the loosest sense of the word. So there, you can be accredited in the States at the state level or at the federal, quote unquote, at the federal level, which is to say the national standard, which is set by a group called the American Bar Association, of which I'm now a member. I went to a state accredited law school, which is very unusual. It was also an entirely online law school. And there were good reasons for doing that. That was something where it would be very curious. Certainly, most attorneys that I'm dealing with now don't care where I went to law school. If people ask or if someone's looking at that, it certainly looks pretty unusual on its face. But at the end of the day, you get through law school and you pass the bar. That's the real test. And if you pass the bar, you're done. You're a lawyer. Congratulations. That's all that's required. So my belief at that time was essentially kind of multiple factors, but one of them was that I thought I was not going to do an MBA. I figured I would learn that information on my own, that I didn't need a degree to learn that. But the other was that I thought law would be kind of a superpower that would be very complementary to being a software engineer. I was definitely right. And now, looking at the pace of AI and everything that has changed, our entire field has reinvented itself every 6 months for the last 2 years. I ended up, whatever time I didn't spend the last 4 years or over that 4 or 5 years trying to become a lawyer, it turned out to be like the trade of the century because I developed this completely complementary skill set that was phenomenally meaningful and informative and helpful in all of these different other circumstances that I never would have if I had just taken the conventional wisdom. So, especially now, like seeing that I have become the software engineer I always wanted to be because every project I've ever thought about building in my entire life up until now, I can now just automate the building up because we have these wonderful tools to make it a lot faster. And then separately, I also get to be a lawyer, right? Whereas, had I not done that, stayed purely as an engineer, I would have just been a software engineer. That just one of the many ordinary software engineers who've had our whole heads have been spinning upside down. It's really been really crazy the last couple of years. It's hard to explain. So that's probably my biggest hard pivot. Probably was a great green pill decision in terms of the opportunities that being an attorney and software engineer has unlocked and the things that I get to work on now. Truly second to none, at least for me.
Certainly not a decision many people make, an interesting combination. And, as you say, some people might have questioned why you were doing that, but it was the right decision for you in the long run. Thank you for sharing that. Now we have come to the segment of our show where I will ask you some rapid fire questions, our version of a game show. Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
One piece of software every investor should have in their stack right now.
PitchBook, I suppose. That's the laziest, easiest answer. Maybe everyone should be using PitchBook or something like that.
What is the most overhyped macro sign people are currently obsessed with?
Oil.
A musical theater lesson that actually made you a better attorney.
Comedic timing and the ability to use rhetoric.
Will AI agents make the internet more useful or just noisier?
Both.
The one bond market red flag that should make anyone nervous.
The US 10-year treasury yield.
One habit that compounds success.
Reading.
Very good. What does freedom mean to you?
Having as many choices as possible. And ideally, the number of choices increasing with time.
Excellent. Well, thank you for playing along. So, David, we have one final tradition. We call it the green pill reflection. I'm going to ask you one thing that might feel a bit unsettling. I'm going to ask you for the truth, not the PR answer. You've mastered the art of changing your circumstances and making good decisions. But even as a software engineer and an attorney, we all have blind spots. What is one glitch in your own decision-making process, perhaps a habit from those early days of being fired a lot, that you are still trying to debug today?
Impatience with software. I have one weakness I have is I have plenty of patience for ordinary, healthy people. I have zero patience. I think like the biggest thing that I find about becoming an adult is I get much more angry, much more quickly, but much more specifically. Right? I will be very annoyed at very precise failures in different areas. So software failures are one example of this trend. That is probably the best answer I could give you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that answer, and thank you for being so real with us today and for proving that our starting position never has to be our finish line. David, can you please tell our audience where they can find out more about your work and follow your insights on tech and law?
Sure, I would be happy to do an ad read. Let's do it. So the background on me, you can find my personal site at my name as a website, davidaw.ad. That has my personal blog. You'll find some research, some like links there for if you're interested in getting in touch with me. My law firm is awad.lawyer. Very small sort of niche practice helping a lot of startups with AI regulatory compliance and software litigation, consulting, etc. If you happen to be dealing with any niche software technology issues, license problems, etc., or you're an attorney looking for a pretty savvy co-counsel to help out with state-specific AI regs or maybe some niche litigation issues, I would love to talk. I'm an EFF cooperating attorney as well, so happy to chat with anyone on those things. I do a ton of patent-related work as well, and so if you're interested in that sort of thing, by all means, feel free to reach out. I also run a very small practice called Luminance. If you are looking or know anyone who's looking for technical due diligence, this is what we do. We've sort of built out a series of very wonderful clients who kind of tap our shoulders when they're making certain tech investments around the world. So we work with a number of funds at the sort of small cap level, small funds, mid cap funds that are cutting $1 to $5 million checks is our sweet spot for helping people understand what tech companies they're working with and what those companies have really achieved versus what they're claiming. Those are the big things. I also am a fractional CTO. If someone is looking for engineering leadership and that kind of thing, I'm happy to have a conversation.
Perfect. We'll also have all those in the show notes. For our audience at home, we hope David's journey has triggered a green pill moment for you today. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about your own compounded decisions or gave you the courage to pivot after a failure, please follow the show and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this message. Until next time, remember that compounding works in every direction. If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.